motion look simple.
What do you say?
You have no chance to survive, mate. Your time.
I'd like to order pizza, Kevin. I'm super hungry.
Yes. What is time? If time is my vessel, then learning to love might be my way back out to sea. The concept of time is something that has fascinated intellectuals ever since the beginning of our species, and pretty much everyone else just hasn't given a shit. But let me tell you something. I care about time, as does Mr. Computer and the Universal Audio 4710D, and naturally, the Antelope Zen Studio. So why are you here then? Perhaps you're curious about time and external clocking and the kind of effects that it might have on your recording system. Is it good? Is it bad? Well, let me tell you something. There is no such thing as good or bad. There are only events, and then we get to decide how we feel about it. Isn't that trippy? So to me, a better question is, will using an external clock get me closer to the production quality and sound that I'm looking for? And so with this video, I thank you for joining us as we embark on a journey of how to set up an external clock and listen to some samples that have been recorded with and without. So today's show stars the Black Lion Audio Mark III Micro Clock XB, which I totally said wrong. It is the Black Lion Audio Micro Clock Mark III XB, which is their latest and greatest and bestest word clock. So just by looking at the front here, you've got their cool logo on it, which is like a lion that's also kind of a circuit board or something. And a couple simple controls. You've got a power button, you've got a dimmer switch for your LCD display, and you've got a little knob here labeled KHZ, which is kilohertz, as in what is your sample rate. To change the sample rate on the Micro Clock Mark III XB is very simple. You give this knob a few twists, and on the third twist, it'll change the sample rate. And the reason for that is so you don't accidentally twist the knob. It's to make sure you're going in the direction you want to. And you'll notice this thing goes up to 384 kilohertz. My system can't go that high. Maybe yours can. I don't know. Pretty cool. Anyways, today we're gonna clock using 96K sample rate. So I'll leave that set there for now. If you look on the back panel of this tiny device, we've got some pretty awesome connections here. You've got 6 BNC outs. So you can connect up to 6 devices just by BNC. You've also got a SPDIF out, an optical out, which is also ADAT, or sometimes called Toslink, and you've got an AES EBU out right here. Today we are going to be using the BNC connectors to clock our Universal Audio 4710D and our Antelope Zen Studio interface here. In order to complete this procedure, you will need your clock, and you will need 2 BNC cables. Now these cables I'm holding are Black Lion Audio's premier BNC connector cable, and you'll see, well, you can't see because it's too dark, but there's a little arrow on here pointing in the direction of output. These cables are optimized to run in a specific direction, and it's important you connect them correctly. Are all cables optimized to run in a specific direction? No, but these are. You can buy these from Black Lion Audio or a dealer, and you're also going to need 2 of these little guys here. These are 75 ohm terminators, and the reason you're going to need these is as word clock is coming into a device, if it is not properly terminated on the output, you'll possibly get reflections that go back down the connection cable and interfere with the clock's internals. Now, I've actually spoken with Black Lion Audio, and they've said that the clock would not be affected by such things, but why take a chance? Now, in reality, you only need 1 of these to go on our Antelope Zen Studio, as the 4710 has a built-in terminator. I bought 2 because I know I'm going to lose one. They're like $3. Just get 2. So let's begin the procedure. The first thing you're going to need to do is use your microfiber cloth to wipe cat hair off of the keyboard and off of the computer. Before I begin connecting the Microclock Mark III XB here, I need to get my ADAT connections set up from my 4710D going into the Antelope Zen Studio. I have these two ADAT cables that permanently live in my rack case, and I happen to know which one of them is 1 and which one of them is 2. So I'm going to just unfasten these here, and I have them already connected to the inputs of my Antelope Zen Studio because this lives in here so they don't ever come out. I do want to suggest anytime you plug in ADAT cables, make sure they're connected securely, because something I've had a problem with in the past is not having it seated quite properly, and I'll hear jitter. I'll hear what sounds like a skipping or a bad connection of some kind. So you want to make sure that you seat these properly. So here is output 1 of the 4710 going in, and here is output 2 of the 4710 right here. And I've connected those, and I don't want to jiggle them around. I want to just seat them in there properly. Some industrial equipment, you'll kind of move around. Not with audio cables. You just put it in. You should hear a satisfying click, and you're good to go. At this point, the 4710 and the Antelope Zen Studio are connected and potentially communicating via ADAT. Now it's time to get our external clock connected here. So we have on the 4710 a clock in and a clock out. And right next to the clock out, we have a little button that says 75 ohm term, and that's our terminator. I'm gonna click that in, and you know what I'm gonna do just because I'm so crazy? I'm gonna put this other terminator on there, so we're gonna have a double terminated 4710. And I'll just stick that on there, and really I'm putting it on there because I don't want to lose it, because that's what I'm gonna do. I already told you about that. We're gonna take one of our cables and make sure that I have the arrow pointed going to our 4710. Again, this is not all word cables. For example, here's just a standard Canary 75 ohm BNC cable. It is bidirectional. And I'll come out of any of these outputs that says BNC out, just because we're engineers, we're gonna come out of one first. And then we're gonna click that on. And let's go ahead and click this onto the word clock in right here of the 4710. Now at this point, we have the output of the clock connected to the input of the 4710. It's worth noting that on the front of the 4710D, there is a knob, and that is what is the clock source. I'll show you this in just a moment. You want the clock source set to WC, as in word clock, as in external word clock. Here's our next cable, and I'm going to repeat this procedure, and I'm going to go out of BNC2 from our micro clock and go into where it says in. It is clearly labeled on the Zen Studio, in and out. Mind your ins and outs, ladies and gents and everybody and all the animals. And here's my second terminator. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and put this on the output of my Antelope Zen Studio. That's it. You want to see the front panel? Welcome to the front panel. On the very bottom right-hand corner of this front panel, we have our sample rate knob, okay? Right now, it's on 96, and there's a light here, a lock light, to show that the clock is locked at that sample rate. I am going to turn this knob to W/C, as in external word clock. Check this out. You want to see a close-up of that? All right, I'll give you a close-up of that. Check this out. The next step is to set the Antelope Zen Studio's control software to look for word clock as the clocking source. Here's how you do that. Syncing the Antelope Zen Studio to an external word clock via the Zen Studio control panel here is really simple. In this drop-down menu here under clock source, we've got WC, and that's for external word clock. And you're going to see that this sample rate is reflecting what I currently have the Mark III XB set to. If I switch back to oven here, this is Antelope Audio's internal clock built in the Zen Studio. So if I reselect the word clock here and I twist this knob on the XB, you can see the sample rate changing in real time as I'm switching it to reflect whatever I have selected on the external word clock. And this is going to function exactly the same regardless of what clock you're using. And again, if I want to switch that back now, you'll see that the sample rate has a drop-down menu. And from here, I can designate what I want it to be set at via the internal clock of the Antelope Zen Studio. Now's the time I thank the Choral Arts Ensemble of Portland. I'm going to be playing two samples for you. They're both from rehearsal, so don't judge the performance, judge the audio quality. These were taken at rehearsal for a recent performance. You can find out more about the Choral Arts Ensemble of Portland at portlandschoir.org. They're an awesome group, nonprofit. I just recorded a concert where there were 40 people in the choir, there were about 20 people in the musicians, someone playing organ, and it was really, really awesome. portlandschoir.org. So the two samples I'm going to play for you from our rehearsal are of an identical section of music that was performed twice. So you'll hear slight differences in the performance itself, but between the two samples and the clocking, here's what you're hearing. Both bounces are in real time. So these are not quick bounces or bounce ahead of time, or I don't know what your program calls it. But these are real-time bounces using two stereo tracks. You're listening to a Royer SF-12 overhead the orchestra, and you're listening to a matched pair of Octavamod MK012 microphones set in ORTF pointed at the choir. An identical setting of EQ has been applied to the bounce with the clock and the bounce without the clock. EQ processing was done with the Waves linear phase equalizer. I hadn't really thought too much about clocking myself until someone finally asked me about it and wanted my opinion on whether or not it was an important piece of equipment. I even spoke to Antelope Audio at the Audio Engineering Society convention, and they were skeptical. I've spoken with a couple other people I know in the field who are also skeptical or really don't see a need for anything beyond what they've already got. They've reached a satisfaction point. So I had to test it. I really wanted to test it. And the reason I chose the Blackline Audio Micro Clock Mark III XB is because it was their latest and greatest. They're a boutique shop out of Chicago, and I was curious, well, what do you get when you spend that kind of money on a clock? Right now, this device is running for somewhere around $1,200 to $1,400, depending on options and cables and stuff like that. So there's a lot of skepticism around the idea, and if you look on the internet, it gets even worse. All of the evidence is strictly anecdotal. It doesn't seem as though there's any real scientific way to validate these things. You can look at statistics and spec sheets for equipment, and you'll actually see that some of the clocks seem superior on paper and actually might not be because of how they're tested and where that data and those statistics come from. A lot of people say that it makes a big difference. I even spoke with a manufacturer of interfaces who said, if I'm concerned about my quality and my clocking, I should consider getting a better quality interface in general. So the odds really seem stacked against it, and I'll tell you what I heard in the differences between using a clock for recording and playback as opposed to just the internal clock for recording and playback. What I hear, and this is really just my opinion and on the system I'm listening back through, is a greater sense of realism. I'm hearing less clashing in mids and highs, and it seems to be more clear, and there's an increased sense of depth is what I'm noticing. I feel as though there's more dynamic range in the bass frequencies, more robustness, more gusto in the lower frequencies underneath 200. Now this is just my experience. I'm not saying what device is best or good or bad, but I do hear a difference. And to me, it seems like just one more step up, getting closer to the sound that I want. And something that appeals to me about having an external word clock like this one is I know that anytime I press record and whatever interface I use, be it my own or someone else's, I can take the clock with me and I can be certain that I'm getting the best phase coherency between my samples and I'm generating the absolute best recordings I can, and that I'm not concerned about the timing between the clocks. Is it worth the money? Now that's a question you'll have to answer for yourself. Depends on where your priorities are, but again, I did feel as though there was an improvement in the recording, and I'm now only curious as to what do other clocks sound like, because something I've read is different clocks generate different kinds of sounds for different equipment. And some people will use clock A for project A and clock B for project B. It's really entirely up to your taste. This is a matter of taste. And I suggest you taste things. So thank you so much for joining me in this experiment. I hope that this was just as much fun for you to watch and learn about. Take a look in the notes below this video. Click to read more. I've got some quotations down there from the designer of the Micro Clock Mark III XB himself. He gave me some feedback regarding spec sheets, and stay tuned for the next video. I'd love to thank Blackline Audio for letting me demonstrate their clock here. Again, I'd love to give a big shout out to the Choral Arts Ensemble of Portland. And as always, thanks to Antelope Audio, Universal Audio, And I'm gonna end the video now.
My soul tripping, blood escapes my veins. Trained to be a slave, promoted to be restrained. The soul with a different name, I was told to not complain. Delusional imitator, something I can't explain. Suicide compatible methods to be deranged. Riches brought the snitches, confliction creates the pain. When she bit me, I was sleeping, it felt good in the fame. I got through the night, it made my whole life change. Before I was poor, no dignity with shame. People pass by, they spit it.